So I have to admit, I'm in a little bit of a writer's block right now for building stuff. So I was thinking about what to do, and then a light bulb went off. I've got this old slab that I've had laying around the shop for a while of some walnut. It's a crotch piece, so there's a lot of figure in it and everything else, and I'm about to move out of my house into a new place, and so I need another piece of furniture to take with me. And so what's better than using some wood that's just laying around? I'll be honest, I really don't even know what dimensions I want this little table bench. I honestly don't even know what I'm building right now, but I don't know what size I want it to be, so I'm trying to figure out the biggest rectangle I can possibly get out of this slab. So I'm just going to be measuring length and width, trying to kind of guess and figure out. My approximate guess is about 51, maybe 52 inches long by 17 wide-ish, maybe a little bit more, but we'll just kind of see what happens. I'm also limited, you'll see here in a second, with my track saw. My rail is only so long, it's only 55 inches long, and I have to have room on each side to be able to clamp my rail down to the slab of wood, so I can't have it too long, but I'm just kind of trying to figure out what size I can get and also where I want to square off of. So when doing a piece like this, typically I'll just mark one straight line, maybe two that I know are parallel to each other. I'll cut one of those first, and then I'll measure everything else off of that one line. That way I know that I'm going to maintain perfect 90 degrees from that point going forward of building my rectangle. Otherwise, you'll kind of get sideways and you'll end up actually making a rhombus or like a parallelogram instead of a true rectangle. Unfortunately, my rail is not long enough for me to cut lengthwise first, so I'm just going to have to chop off one of the ends and go off that for everything else as far as measuring goes. It pains me so much to have to cut off this awesome crotch piece, but unfortunately I have not found out a good way for how to put legs on a piece of live edge that has a crotch. To me, it just doesn't look good, even if you use hairpin legs on sort of either side of that crotch. There's nothing that looks great about it in my opinion, and not that I'm a perfectionist, but I try to make stuff look as good as I can. So unfortunately, I had to cut it off, but it's okay. It'll still look good, I promise. A minute ago, I mentioned how important it was to maintain square when trying to do this. And so all I'm doing here is I'm marking the length in two different places, that way I can maintain parallel to the side that I previously cut. And then I'm just going to flip the piece around and chop off that other end, making sure that I have enough length to attach my rail to the length of the piece, which again is 55 inches. So I ended up cutting these right at about 50.5 inches. So right under 51, 50.5, 50 3/4, something like that. But that's the length I got out of this, which I still think will be okay. I'm not losing as much as what I honestly thought I was going to have to. And so this piece is still going to be long enough for me to make it into kind of whatever I need it to be. So finally, after I get my rail attached, it's time to start cutting the piece, and it's just one of those things that takes a while. I've got a TS55 track saw from Fez Tool, and it's a great saw. It's not underpowered by any means, but I always do several passes if I'm doing 8/4 inch material, just for the factor if I don't want to wear the blade out. You know, it's a $100 blade and I don't feel like having to spend that more than what I have to, and so I normally take 3 or 4 passes for 2-inch thick material. So you'll just see that with all these cuts I'm doing. I'm never doing it in one cut. I probably could. There's not a whole lot of stress in the wood, so I'm not really worried that the wood is going to bind or anything like that, but it just better safe than sorry. And just as I did before, how I marked parallel lengthwise, now I'm going to do it widthwise, and so I'm just really trying to figure out how wide I can get the piece first off, and then marking that same width on both sides. And so that width came out to be right at 17 inches, and so I'm just going to cut it right on that 17 mark and yet again attach my rail and make the cut. I tell you what, I bet you didn't know that I lived underneath my workbench at night. I'm kidding. But this is, in my opinion, the most difficult portion of this whole build, which is because this is a slab, there's a lot of voids in it, a lot of checks and just different knotty pieces that have little voids in it and everything. And so that kind of brings up the issue for, well, how do we fill those holes? Because if we don't fill the holes up, what's going to happen is as soon as I put finish on top of the piece, the finish is going to want to soak into those holes, and then basically when we look at the piece from afar, it's not going to look flat because essentially it's not going to. All of the finish is going to immediately go into the hole and fill that up instead of actually stay on top of the wood. So it's pretty important that we figure out a way to plug those holes up. And my method of that is going to be doing that with CA glue or super glue, essentially. So I got the black color of Starbond's CA glue and an accelerator, and all I'm gonna do is basically just squeeze some glue into those holes, activate it with the accelerator, and then let it dry and sand it off. Unfortunately, this is a pretty long process because filling these massive voids with super glue isn't ideal. Technically, I should probably be doing this with an epoxy or a resin, but because I don't want to have to wait 2 weeks, I'm just impatient like that. I think CA glue is the best thing that I can possibly be doing. So that's the reason that you're going to have to watch me squeeze super glue into this piece of wood for the next several minutes. In case you were wondering, Starbond does a fantastic job with their CA glue. And I know that by just how long it took me to sand the thin layers of this that I put on this slab. I mean, literally, I had to sand this for over 2 hours, which luckily for your sake, I have condensed that down to just a couple minutes, but it's incredibly strong. I mean, I was just shocked. I mean, this is 60 grit sandpaper. 60, and it still took me forever to try to sand through this stuff. And just like normal, if you've done this before, you'll know this, but you don't get everywhere in the first couple times that you actually put glue in those voids, just because when you activate it, it sort of spreads it out a little bit, if that makes sense, and so you create a little pocket inside that void. And so frequently I'll have to go back and put more glue in those same voids 2 or 3 times, just enough until you can see that it's all one consistent smooth surface on the top of the piece of wood. I wanted to take the time to say thank you to everybody who's been watching these videos. Obviously, I'm still just getting started with this whole process, and so any feedback is greatly appreciated. If you want to like this video or leave me a comment of how I could improve, or shoot me a text if you have my number, that would be fantastic. I greatly appreciate it. But I hope that you have enjoyed this. This is going to be part 1 of a 2-part video, and I will release the second part a week from today. But this is just part 1 of this little furniture to be determined piece. I still don't know what it's going to be, but stay tuned and I will see you at part 2. Thanks for watching.
You know the trees don't grow like they used to before. Oh, there's something about the leaves. I think they turned a shade that I've never seen before. Green leaves, a purple sky. Oh, they're falling in the rain. Here we go. Another roots, another roots. I know the trees don't grow where they used to. No, they don't. Oh, another roots, another roots. No, the trees don't grow.